I thought that I'd offer a little video that perhaps pulls back the veil and gives you some insight into what it is a professor is looking for when they're asking you to do an assignment. You know, there is a kind of game to being a college student that if you know the rules, it's kind of straightforward and sort of easy. But if you don't know the rules, you're kind of shooting in the dark and you're not sure what's expected of you. So when you see an assignment and you read it, you're not quite sure, well, what is that really saying? So I thought I'd give a couple of tips that I think would help you with that. First of all, and one of the most important, is that you actually take the time to read the directions carefully and do what the directions say. And that might sound obvious, but a professor has usually spent a lot of time thinking about what it is they want you to do and crafting the assignment or the question in such a way that you're going to maximize what you're going to get out of it. If you don't do or don't read it carefully, you're not going to get out of it, and the professor is going to be, oh, well, you're not playing the game of being a college student right. So if you want to win at the game of being a college student, what I would suggest is read the question carefully and then visualize to yourself, well, what would it look like to do what this professor is asking me to do? Kind of make a mental image of what the final product looks like. What is the professor actually asking? And that's going to help you a lot to set the agenda and make sure that you're actually thinking through what it is that you want to do for the assignment. A second, and possibly the most important to understand clearly how it works, demonstrate in your answer. And when I say demonstrate, I mean give evidence that you've read the material. I can't emphasize this enough. This is like the old joke, show me the money, right? What a professor wants to see when they've assigned something is the evidence that you've, in a sense, digested the material. You haven't just read it, but you've thought about it, you've reflected on it, and that your mind has been formed as a result of the work that you've done. So how do you show that? You know, it's one thing to say, okay, I want evidence, but how do you give evidence? What does that look like? So let me tell you two things that it doesn't look like. One, it is not cutting and pasting a quote from a reading or from a website. Just throwing in some quotes that is vaguely about the topic isn't what a professor is looking for. Here's the trick. Adding a quote is actually more work than just simply stating it yourself. Because when you add a quote, you want to do two things. First, you want to make sure that the quote is actually saying it's saying something that's relevant to what you think what the question is, or what you think the purpose of the assignment is. A lot of times people just add a quote that has nothing to do with anything. It's a quote from the assignment, but it doesn't in any way contribute to the thought on the assignment. So it's not just adding a quote, it's adding a good quote. That's step one. And step two is explaining the quote, explaining what the quote is saying, restating what the quote is saying, and then connecting it to your larger point that's connected to the assignment. So adding a quote might be something that you do occasionally, but it's actually more work. So you don't want to do it often, and you want to, if you do it, you want to make sure that you don't just cut and paste. So when I say give evidence you've read the material, just cutting and pasting a quote is not that. In fact, oftentimes it gives the opposite effect. It might not be about what you're thinking it's about, and there's no explanation. So your professor is actually thinking, this person is trying to do the opposite of what I'm asking them to do. Because what I'm asking them to do is read and wrestle with the material, and then give evidence that they've read it and wrestled with the material. Adding a quote does not do that. Secondly, another thing that students do a lot is they'll reference the reading without explaining it. So they might say, let's call the reading such and such, because I can't think of one off the top of my head. So such and such reading says a lot about liberal studies. I learned a lot about liberal studies by reading such and such text. Okay? You've told me that you've read the text, and you've told me that it's about liberal studies, but anyone who's taking this class would have known that. You didn't have to read the text to know that. So what do you do? So those are the things not to do. What do you need to do to demonstrate it? One, you summarize what the main point of the text is about. You give an overall summary that says, this is what the text is saying. This is why it's important. This is the main point of the text. You restate in your own words what key terms, key ideas, the emphasis of the material. You restate it in your own words what it is. If it has a particularly important idea, I'm making one up, like transference or something, then you would explain the idea of transference, but you would do it in your own words. You wouldn't just quote it. You would attempt to rephrase it. You know, what is the main point of this? What is the idea here? What is the concept here? So by using your own terms and rephrasing and restating things, by summarizing the main point of the article and then explaining how the article is relevant to the question at hand, that's how you demonstrate. That's how you give the evidence that you've read the material. So that's really important. I hope that helps. A couple other things I'll just say very briefly. One is that recognize in an L class, a literacy class, writing and grammar matters even in your discussion posts. So even when you're replying to someone in your discussion posts, you should write it as well as you can. And I'll add this. This is a really great trick that I've learned. Read your writing out loud. If you actually read your writing like you're trying to communicate it, like for example, when I filmed my video at the beginning of this module or at the beginning of this course, I had the text actually up on a screen. It was a blue screen somewhere. And as I read it out loud, I realized how bad it was. And I had to say, stop, stop. And I took it down and I rewrote it and I read it out loud. And then I said, okay, this is what I want to read. Because the reason this works is that your ear hears mistakes better than your eye sees mistakes. You're used to hearing language. You're not as used to reading it. And so you'll hear the mistakes before you'll see them. So read out loud your text before you turn them in. I guarantee you'll catch mistakes right and left, and it'll save you many trips to the writing center. Another thing I would say is don't tell me what you think I want to hear. What I actually want to hear are two things: reality, what you actually were thinking and reflecting on as you were reading this material. I don't like to hear canned, this was a great assignment, because, and no professor wants to hear that. What they want to hear is how you actually engaged it. That's what they're interested in. They're not interested in what you think I want to hear. I don't need a pat on the back. What I want is to hear and to see the evidence that you've engaged with the assignment. And there might be things that you just didn't get, or that you didn't like, or it didn't work. For perhaps it was an assignment, a task of some sort. And it's fair game to say, I don't think that this part of the assignment really worked as well. I think what you were trying to get at is this, and it didn't really do that because of this. Wow, a professor is really impressed when they hear that, because that's actual engagement with the material or with the assignment. And that's what they want ultimately. They don't want you to just say, I really like this assignment, it was great because, unless that was the case. And then you want to say why it was great. You don't want to just say it was great. You want to say the reason why it was great is because it allowed me to do these three things, or I really learned in depth these